Last time we were together in the book of James, we talked about the danger of rationalizing our sin. We have this tremendous capacity to blame others for it, and often we even blame God. And James says, don't blame God. God doesn't tempt us with evil, but we are tempted because of our own lust. We're drawn away and enticed, he said there in verse 14. I want to read two more verses for you this morning from James 1, verses 15 and 16. James continues this conversation. Then desire, when it is conceived, brings or gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. James says there's actually a very distinct process by which this happens. We all have inherited this sin nature at birth because of Adam and Eve's sin in the garden. Romans 5 makes that very clear to us. And so we have this capacity to sin all on our own. We don't need any help. And our lust, our desire is easily enticed. And when we see and hear and are involved in things in this world, it ignites that. And then James says this desire conceives and gives birth to sin. So he uses the example of a mother giving birth to a child. There is conception, and then there is development, and then there is the birth. And that's the way it is with sin. There is the conception of sin in our hearts and minds. We think about it, our own lust is activated, our own desires, and then there is an incubation process. Sometimes it might be hours or even days, or perhaps it's mere seconds, whereby we in our minds consider this sin. Unfortunately, that's the way that our minds work. When we are tempted, then we actually consider it. Maybe I would like to do that. Maybe I do want to say that. Maybe I do want to be involved in that illicit activity. There is a process, and then there is the moment of disobedience. James says it gives birth to sin. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't even stop there, because sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. We know that sin causes physical death, the breaking down of our bodies. That is a process, again, that started at the sin of Adam and Eve, whereby our bodies are continually breaking down. Sin has wreaked havoc on this world physically, in disease and all kinds of things, but also it brings forth spiritual death. That is, sin separates us from God. That is the end result of our sin. What James wants us to see, my friends, is that this process is all self-contained. That's why I believe he says in verse 16, do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. What is he saying to us? He's saying, stop blaming everyone else for our sin. It's all right here. It's a heart problem. We have everything that we need to sin in us. This is not our neighbor's fault. This is not our spouse's fault, our children's fault, our parents' fault. It is certainly not God's fault. And actually, what we need to understand here is that it's not even Satan's fault. Does Satan tempt us? Do his demons, his minions, play an active role in the sin patterns of this world? Yes, but James doesn't even mention Satan here. We don't even need Satan to sin, my friends. We can do that all by ourselves. This is an internal problem, and James challenges us to identify these steps so that we can see when they are happening in our lives. Folks, let's guard our hearts against these things. Do not let sin conceive and develop. When we see things, when we hear things, we are tempted to do things. Let's ask for God's grace and strength to nip these things in the bud so that they do not develop into life-altering patterns that lead to death.